Well, ladies and gentlemen and everyone, welcome. My name's Julie McCrossin, and it's my great pleasure to welcome Deb Tsorbaris from the Centre for Excellence in Child and Family Welfare in Victoria. And we're here to discuss the Victorian experience of what makes a difference when it comes to improving services in child protection and family welfare support from a non-government organisation perspective, and also from the point of view of a peak agency. And I'm broadcasting to you today on the land of the Kaurna people in Adelaide in South Australia. Welcome to you, Deb.
Oh, thank you, Julie. It's lovely to be here with all my South Australian colleagues. And I'm calling in from Wonderyland, the great Kulin Nation here in Victoria.
Look, thank you. A new government's come in South Australia, and here in the non-government sector, working in child protection, family support, they want to go to the government and say, here are some key things we want to work on with you to do better here in South Australia. Before I get into the nitty-gritty of it, I know you believe that when it comes to being a peak, you need to change the way that you work and change the way that you are perceived. That's what you've learned in the years in your job. What do you mean by that?
I think that in the area of child welfare, it actually it's about hope and it's about what works. And in working with government departments, it's actually about doing the work to find out what works, not just continually talking about the problems, because actually everybody knows them. I mean, the man on the street knows the problems that we have with our child protection and child welfare system. So for me, it's about going to government with solutions and being hopeful, because let's face it, in this area, it can feel overwhelmingly difficult. And so we do a lot of our own homework, so to speak, and go to government with solutions. And I think that has changed our relationship.
And when you go to solutions, your emphasis too is, what does the evidence tell us is the solution to that problem? So just to give a quick example of how you took a solution to government, having done the work to have the evidence to convince them, this is what you need to fund, this is what we need to do together.
So in remembering that we're a peak industry body, we've got some fabulous leaders that work both in Victoria and across jurisdictions. And they and I talk to people globally about the work they are doing in the child welfare and child protection area, that they are seeing results. Talk to us about the results. There are conferences globally on evidence-based models, so I went to those. And so what we did was looked around the world and in Australia, what was working and what had promise and what we could implement. And then thought about the value of that, the value to the child, the value to family, the value to the economy, what it would cost, and in essence, how it might transform our workforce. So in a way, that was our starting point. Because to be honest, in this area, we do labour the problem a lot, and we're not always as disciplined as we need to be about the solutions.
Okay, look, let's go to some of the solutions. And I'm asking you for the Victorian experience, and we're listening here in South Australia to look, what lessons that are there that may guide our continuing work. So let's go to workforce development. What are the key things you're doing in Victoria to attract, retain, and also professionally develop the essential workforce? And I'm talking about supporting foster carers, kinship carers, non-government organisation staff, residential staff, youth workers, the whole lot. What are you doing for workforce development?
Oh, well, I want to provide a caveat here that we have had COVID, and it has absolutely knocked us every state and territory for six around a pipeline of workers, and people are very tired. Like, the first thing people say to me in a meeting, I just got off a meeting this morning, is workforce is a big problem. And with the borders being closed, presented some challenges. But both as a peak and individual organisations, we absolutely are committed to providing our workers with, again, the evidence-informed practices that mean that both they and the client they're working with get a benefit. So in Victoria, we use evidence-based models. We also use these things called common practices, things like motivational interviewing, so that these workers can actually use the best and up-to-date practices with the clients that they're working with. And so in Victoria, I must say, it's about evidence, evidence and evidence, whether it's the program or the training. It's about saying, well, what's going to work for the people that we're working with. The centre itself provides quite a lot of training. We've got a whole L&D area.
What's L&D?
Learning and development, Julie. Shorthand. We use way too many acronyms. So the learning and development area of the peak provides a lot of training to residential care workers, to our family support workers, and a range of other professions, in order to, again, provide the sort of up-to-date knowledge to those workers in the field. COVID's been really interesting because in many ways, being able to provide leadership during really tough times, being able to, and again, what's the most available evidence, but also supporting workers to have the resilience that they need to have to keep on going during really tough times. So in many ways, we've had to cover both the evidence, but also how to stay resilient during these times.
I'm seeking in this discussion to alert people to topics, and I think your website contains a lot of follow-up material, and I'll get some other information about follow-up for people watching who'd like to learn more. But I guess the bottom line is, have you managed to attract and retain staff successfully? Because I think, there's a workforce crisis happening in many areas. How are you going in terms of improving attracting staff and keeping them and getting them to do good work?
Yeah, I think that in some of our workforces we've absolutely retained staff. So our family services in Victoria is enormous. It's a couple of thousand workers. Those workers stay for the long term, and they always have, because they're great jobs. They're incredible professionals, they stay. In our residential care sectors, we get a lot of churn workers. I mean, it's a difficult job, can be very challenging. So we get quite a bit of churn there. And that's a very strong focus of attention for us at the moment, to try and sort of stabilise that workforce and continue to talk about what a valued occupation it is. So it's quite different in different occupations. When it comes to carers, Julie, we run what's called the Fostering Connections recruitment model. We help to recruit carers on a statewide basis, and that's been funded by government. And so there's a very big emphasis by our government on recruiting carers. Again, COVID's had a big impact, but we're holding. The holding's important in this space, trying to keep the carers that we have. We just completed a bit of work around foster care in terms of the value of foster care in Victoria. And as you can imagine, the economic value of carers in Victoria is not insignificant. So we're pretty proud of that, particularly our foster care program.
Let me come to the question of what you're doing in Victoria to keep children and young people safe when they're in care. We've been hearing from some young people for this special forum we're having in South Australia. And I have to say that as I spoke to some of these young people, they were still experiencing multiple placements and a sense of anxiety about their safety. And the turnover of case managers, I think is often the expression that's used, makes them feel unsafe. So again, in a nutshell, and any resources you can refer us to, what are you doing to improve the safety of young people while they're in care?
Look, probably this is a cornerstone issue, isn't it, Julie? I mean, safety of children in our child protection systems. And I wouldn't say that we've cracked that nut, but certainly we have some things in place now in Victoria that we're pretty proud of, and we hopefully are starting to see some change. And
could you be specific?
Yeah. So our reportable conduct scheme that's run by our commissioner, that's been in place for 2 or 3 years now. We get regular reports from our commissioner about what's actually happening, what the data tells us about how safe children are in care.
Could I just say there, in the issues paper for this special forum in early May, there is a call from the sector for a reportable conduct scheme in South Australia. In a nutshell, why is that an important initiative?
Oh, well, it's about accountability. It's actually about accountability of our workforces and our organisations in terms of things that might actually be going wrong for the children. In terms of potential or actual abuse of children in care. And it isn't just a scheme that covers the child welfare organisations, it's a scheme that has much broader remit. And so, every now and again we sit with our commissioner and she says, actually, you're doing really well. You've had less reportable conduct allegations coming through to my people, or this is what you're doing well and this is what you're not doing well. And so it's about accountability, because as you can imagine, for years it was unknown. There was no accountability. So for young people and for workers and for organisations, having those sorts of what I would call high impact, high accountability schemes are really important, because it gives you data about how the system is travelling, but also how an organisation is travelling around keeping kids safe. The other thing that we have in place is a Ministerial Youth Advisory Committee. It's about 20 young people that sit with the minister each month and talk to him about what's going on in the system and what they want to see changed.
And are they young people or children who are actually in care?
Actually in care. So often these children, they're either in foster care, kinship care or residential care, and they don't hold back, as you can imagine, Julie. They talk about what their experience of care is right now, what's gone wrong for them, what's gone right for them, and they talk very honestly and candidly about the things the minister needs to focus on. And access to mental health services, issues to all of those things that we know are really important, the minister is able to hear from them firsthand. Kids also talk about the positives. They talk about what's kept them safe. There's lots of young people there talking about how important their foster care is, to keep their foster carer healthy because their foster carer keeps them safe. For other children who are in other forms of care, what is going wrong for them, what's going wrong for them in transition, or, how their educational needs are not being met or how they might be being met. So it's very powerful to have the minister meet directly with those young people. It's a newish innovation in Victoria, only been going for about 3 years. But those young people influence the way the minister's thinking.